great joys of my career has been playing with various different rhythm sections, various different musicians, whether it's on recording sessions or in bands. You know, when I worked with Eric Clapton, we had the great Nathan East on bass and Steve Ferroni on drums. Steve now plays with Tom Petty, so he's a heartbreaker. And then, of course, with the Stones, you have, when I first came in, Bill Wyman was still in place, and so it was Bill Wyman and Charlie Watts. I mentioned how Charlie is a jazz fanatic. He studies jazz. Tell you everybody that ever played with Duke Ellington, Count Basie, or any of the great big bands. And Bill was a very, very inventive bass player. He kind of played non-bass bass. You know, he would play slightly more melodically at times. But of course, he also worked with Charlie. You know, we all know the bass and the bass drum patterns that occur, which are kind of the basis of a lot of rock and roll, as we know. But Bill would sort of deviate from that and be more melodic from time to time. Barry Oakley, when I was with the Allman Brothers Band, God rest his soul, Barry was also very inventive in that way, played much more melodically as a bass player. And of course, with the Allman Brothers, we had two drummers. We had J-Mo, who is a fabulous jazz drummer, and then we had Butch Trucks, and Butch is more of a straight-ahead, hold-the-beat-down kind of guy. And what would happen there is, you know, Butch would be just kind of swinging along there, and Jay would kind of color all around and play around with the cymbals and tom-toms and such. And Jay tended to use a smaller drum kit, tighter drum kit, higher tones, and Butch had the bigger bass drum, the bigger tom-toms and so forth, fatter snares. But yeah, you know, it's wonderful to be able to play with those different players and get the different grooves. Boy, these New Orleans guys, Freddie Staley was one of the great players that has worked on some Dr. John records. We had Zigaboo Motiste when we were doing this show last week. He played on Junko Partner, if any of you are familiar with that song. It's a pretty traditional New Orleans song. And they, of course, you may be familiar with the term second line. Second line drumming. They were the second line in the parade in New Orleans, and that's why they called them that. But they had this, you know, this just fabulous rhythm that would occur, and you could not sit still. You can't sit still when you hear this thing. My goodness, who else? I don't know. It's just everything's, you know, you go with the flow on this deal. You find ways to work with those different musicians in different ways and try to, again, communicate with them. Communication is everything. You know, you want to be listening to them and finding ways to fit your bits in.
Do this on the way out. You ready?
I'm scared.
Oh, ready?
Go ahead.
I'm scared.
Okay. All right. Is it true that when Daryl Jones came into the band and they were like kind of courting him, he thought they were baloneying him? And they said, "Oh, that's okay. Send us your ABA number." And he checked his account the next day, and they weren't baloneying him. You don't have to answer it. That
No. I'll tell you as much as I know, because quite frankly, I was not in on some of those auditions. But what happened was, you know, so many bass players came in and auditioned for that gig after Bill Wyman left. Everybody from Hutch Hutchinson, if you know who he is, to, oh my goodness, there was probably 15, 20 players. And from what I heard, you know, the principals, after a while, just kind of got exhausted with it. And everybody had something to say musically. They were all really good bass players. And so it came time to make the decision. Everybody looked at Charlie Watts and said, "It's up to you, man." You know, and I think Charlie, because of his love of jazz and the fact that Daryl Jones had played with Miles Davis and been to that school, I think that's kind of where the decision went. I don't know about the bank account. I'll have to ask Daryl about that. I don't know. Yeah.
Have you ever worked with Walter Wolfman Washington? And did Keith Richards ever talk about him in your presence, or?
No,
he's an influence of his.
Unfortunately, I have not. There's some great books that I'm sure some of you are familiar with. I remember seeing his name in maybe it was A Left Hand Like God, which is a great book about boogie-woogie players and all. But man, you know, there's so many wonderful players that have influenced all of us, and I wish I had played with him. Has Keith ever mentioned it? Probably. I can't remember right off the top of my head, to be honest with you, but yes.
You're a musical director for the Stones, so how do you do that? These big egos and all the people in there.
That's-
when they've been doing it for so long.
Well, that's something that evolved, and I'll tell you how it went. In 1982, when I came in, the set was the same every night. It was like the same set every night for 20 shows, whatever it was, in Europe when I first came in. And then there was this, we did a couple of records over a period of a few years, but there was no touring until 1989. We got back together for the Steel Wheels tour, and I went to Mick and I said, man, you got such a body of work. You got to get out of this box of the same thing every night, please, and let's, okay, Chuck, so we'll start experimenting. And I started taking copious notes every time we'd play a song or try it out. Might do a chart of it or make a note about were there horns on it, what was the horn line, were the BGVs, what were the parts for the BGVs, background vocalists. Do we change anything in the arrangement for live purposes, that sort of thing. So I began to put together these notebooks, and I would put them into a protective plastic sheet and fold it over and go to the next one, and through the years after that experience, I kind of became the go-to guy. Keith would say, "How's the middle eight go, man? I can't believe, can't remember it." And so then that led to sometimes they would be unsure of themselves. Charlie was like not sure where the beat stops or where the bridge comes in or whatever, and so I'd give little hand signals. Okay, now, and. Mick the same way, because Mick Jagger's out there trying to entertain. He's running up and down. He's clapping the hands, trying to get the crowd to come with him. And all of a sudden he's like, "There's a verse," when he looks at me. So it's just something that evolved, and it's a lot of fun to have that position.